All right, I'm the Flat Rate Master, and today we're talking about a great case study of a toxic work environment. So we've all been in that toxic work environment, and today we're going to differentiate between toxicity caused by management, toxicity caused by technicians. We're going to call both groups out. So let's talk about the case study. If you're in the tech space, you know Linus Media Group. They've gone under a lot of fire recently for, well, production problems, work environment problems, etc. And I thought it was a great case study in how toxic an environment can be without really anybody pointing it out or knowing about it. So if you don't know who I'm talking about, Linus Media Group, their main channel is Linus Tech Tips. They put out a bunch of content. They have many channels, but they have a very strict schedule. They put out a lot of content, and they've been moving into the very technical reviews of PC parts and that kind of stuff, expanding what they do. So another YouTuber, Gamers Nexus, called them out on inaccuracies in their technical testing data. They also called them out on internal issues as far as miscommunications, especially when it involved a prototype product. But they also pointed out in LTT's own video, their staff was talking about how quality had fallen so bad in their productions. Now, where this is relevant to automotive is it was turned out to be a very toxic environment. They were pushed very hard to keep the schedule up. After all this stuff hit, a former employee on Twitter accused them of having such a brutal work schedule for what she did for them, along with sexual harassment charges. But mostly what she talked about was how grueling the actual schedule was, how little support she had for her role. Great study of toxic work environment. I know this was a long, rambling kind of explanation. The reason I point this out is this is a great case study in a toxic work environment that even maybe the employees or the employer really don't realize. And that's why I'm doing this video. Now we're going to bounce between management toxicity and technician toxicity, just so you know. But first off, we're going to talk about, well, technician toxicity in this little bit, and that is the flat rate mentality of, I'm not helping anybody else in the shop. Everybody's on their own. I'm on flat rate. I don't get paid for that. Caveat, I've never worked in a shop that did that, probably because I've always helped everybody I could in the shop, whether it was pushing a car in, helping them technical advice, etc. I've always been helpful. So maybe it was me that didn't happen in the shops I worked at, but it happens. We know it happens. And that is, unfortunately, a byproduct of the flat rate system. It's one of the issues with flat rate. Now, I'd like to point out, chances are the techs that are really ingrained into that atmosphere probably would do it in an hourly shop. They'd be forced to help, but they wouldn't help with technical. They wouldn't be doing anything to help the shop that they didn't have to. It is a problem with that technician in that environment, but I still think they would do it regardless. But the flat rate system does not help in that situation. So this one ties back to LTT, unrealistic production. Go, 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 go. Whether you're hourly or flat rate, you can only do so much regardless. And it's very toxic for shop management to think they can just push, push, push. Well, we need to get this car back, so you're gonna have to stay late. Whether you're hourly or flat rate, I don't agree with that. Over at the old shop, I had a technician multiple times who was forced to stay late to finish a car because the customer had to have it back. It's funny how things change based on whatever, but I know that's an excuse of every shop manager is, well, the customer's complaining about it, and any other car they could figure out something, put them in a rental car. Nope, this car, they gotta have it back. Usually for a trip. That's toxic. Another technician I can point out used to work at the shop. He always got slammed with 20, 30, 40 hours on Thursday and expected it all to get done by Friday. And he burned out at the shop because of that. That's toxic. That's straight up just toxic. You have to set reasonable expectations of your techs. You can't expect them to go 120% every day and expect them not to burn out. It's toxic. There's no way around it. Push until we get, X amount of numbers, and then they push some more and then wonder why they have high turnover. Well, because you're pushing people to the breaking point. It's toxic. So let's talk about unhappy technicians in the shop. Now, usually this is blamed on prima donna, just a miserable person. He's got issues going on in his life. And this one's a lot harder to just point out. Most shop owners just blame the technician. Straight up, it's the technician's problem. And it may not be. And I mean that with as much honesty as I can muster, because he might be unhappy and be vocal about it, but other people in the shop won't say anything about the same problems. Let's use a hypothetical. In a shop meeting, they're sitting there talking about, and he brings up these problems, and he's immediately dismissed as wrong. As somebody that can attest to that, legitimate problems, brushed off. So the rest of the staff is already going to know anything you bring up is going to be immediately blown off as you're wrong. So they're not going to talk about it. They're not going to bring up that they have the same issues. They're going to avoid that confrontation because they know it's pointless. As management, you're perpetuating a toxic work environment because you're not addressing their concerns. Now, not saying their concerns are legitimate or necessary or anything else. I'm saying you have to address them. You can't blow them off. And that's a huge problem with managers. Most of them are very strong personalities and they think they're always right. And they rarely are. Now, the argument is it's his business. He can run it how he wants. Speaking about a shop owner, true. But is he doing what's best for the business to treat his people like that? No. So let's talk about some of the best advice I've ever gotten when it comes to being management. When you go into a meeting with underlings, superiors, peers, pretend like you know nothing and pretend like you're the stupidest person in the room. What I mean by that is anybody in that meeting can bring something new, better to the table. Most managers will immediately dismiss ideas simply because of ego. Because you don't want to do something doesn't mean there's not a better idea out there. And most shop owners, managers, don't go into anything with an open mind. Even when they go into shop management groups, whatever, they rarely go in there with a really open mind. They go in there with a very closed mind, very skeptical. Even when it's obvious they're wrong, they still hold on to those ideals and they just don't want to let them go. It's a very toxic way of looking at life. Very rarely at the old shop was anything really discussed. From my experience as a manager, I was told how things were. My point of this is, as managers, when you have a toxic environment, you really have to look at this culture you're cultivating. Firing a technician that's toxic, prima donna or whatever, rarely fixes issues that are based on, fundamental issues. Just saying. All it does is shift the problem somewhere else. That's why I said it's a very difficult thing to traverse. Next one, we're going to pick on technicians, and that I'm not doing that. Very toxic. It's just straight up is, I'm not doing that oil change. I'm not pulling that car in to test that battery. I'm not doing that. Toxic, straight up. It's a shop. Cars need to get done. Now, while it may be below your pay grade, it's not below you. I've never had a problem doing oil changes. I've never had a problem pulling a car in, checking a battery, etc. Just a quick note, only one guy ever said no to me on taking a car, and he works there again, just saying. But anyway, Nobody else said no. Everybody was more than willing. But saying no to a car is just straight up toxic. I'm not doing that because it's beneath me, just straight up toxic. So let's talk about not fixing problems in your shop. Most shops are run, well, let's say poorly. Ticket distribution, guys are always running out of work. Other guys are stacked up days out. Shows you have a ticket distribution problem. Whether you're hourly or flat rate or whatever, everybody in the shop should at least be relatively the same amount of busy, but I see so many shops where that's just not the case. And that could be a distribution issue, that could be a technician issue. Depends very much on the situation, but 9 times out of 10, it's distribution. Shops pushing high profitability work on lower paid technicians, dumping the BS diags on technicians that are higher, et cetera, et cetera. It's usually a distribution problem rather than technicians not wanting to work, especially when they're on flat rate. Fixing procedural problems, communication in the shop. I did a video about communication. Communication is something that so many people suck at, and it's almost never addressed properly. It's always somebody else's problem. For me, it was always put on me. It was my communication to the shop manager that was the problem, never his lack of communication to me, which other people have complained about, but it was my problem. I digress. Fixing those kind of issues is the priority of a shop owner. If he wants a smooth running, profitable business, those problems need to be addressed, not swept under the rug. And that's very toxic because they're not fixing their business. All they're doing is sweeping it under the rug. Extremely toxic, because all you're doing is putting a toxic work environment onto your employees from top to bottom. The worse your procedures are, especially, the worse everything runs. You want to be as efficient as possible. That means communication. That means doing what you're supposed to. That means having your entire crew working at top efficiency. They can't get past their own hubris to realize these problems need to be addressed, creating a toxic work environment because things aren't getting done the way anybody else in the shop can see needs to be done. It's toxic. You want to run a crappy business? Well, you have a toxic work environment. Sorry. You want to treat people like crap? You're going to have a toxic work environment. Loading up the good old boys with all the work, starving the other guys out because you don't like them or whatever, kind of shows how toxic you really are. So, hope this video was helpful. As always, thanks for watching. I am the Flat Rate Master.